The village, the woman, and the whispered power. Opening. A village bound by appearances. In the secluded heartland of the east, nestled among whispering palms and sun-baked clay roads, lay the village of Acor. Life in Acor moved with predictable rhythm. Roosters crowed before the dawn, women drew water in brass pots, and the elders passed quiet judgment from under the shade of mango trees. But even in this cocoon of routine, one name provoked hushed voices and lingering glances. Annette. Annette was unlike any other woman in Acor, and she wore her difference like a second skin. She did not conform. She did not belong to anyone. While other young women busied themselves with daydreams of weddings, dowries, and suitable husbands, Annette played a different game. A game that required no veil, no vows, and no permission. She was tall, striking, with eyes that dared you to look away first. Her laughter, when it came, was unfiltered, loud, and brazen. Many called her shameless, but to Annette, shame was just another leash, one she had chewed through long ago. Love is a transaction, she once said, pouring palm wine for a trader twice her age. And I always make sure I get paid. Contrast with the village women. Other women in Acor kept their disdain wrapped in silence or spat it out in small circles by the well. But whenever they hurled insults, Annette had a tongue sharpened by wit and zero patience for hypocrisy. "It's not my fault your husbands keep visiting me," she once quipped to a group of married women with pinched expressions and tightly knotted wrappers. "Maybe if you made them feel wanted, they wouldn't knock on my door." To the younger women, she was both terrifying and magnetic. They laughed at her behind her back, mocking her unmarried status. But even then, her comebacks stung like bees. You're married but starving. He can't feed you, and you think you're better than me." Annette was unapologetic, and unapologetically successful in her own way. Men in Acor were drawn to her like iron to a magnet. Some came seeking thrill, others comfort. But they all left lighter, in their pockets, and sometimes their pride, and many came crawling back. Power and performance, the seduction game. But Annette's power wasn't just in beauty, it was in strategy. She understood desire, not just how to ignite it, but how to direct it. When she spoke, she measured her pauses like poetry. When she moved, her steps told stories that required no words. It was said that she could read a man's needs before he could voice them. That she used no charms, no spells, but somehow left every man bewitched. There were rumors, of course. They always came with women like her. Some claimed even the king of Acor had once stopped his procession just to watch her fetch water, transfixed by the rhythm of her body and the fire in her gaze. Others swore she had turned warriors into beggars and merchants into fools. But one thing was certain: Annette was a force. Key passage, bolded, the whisper of opportunity, approx 200 words. One evening, as dusk brushed the village in gold, Annette heard something that made her pause mid-step. A group of traders had just returned from the east, drunk on palm wine and louder than usual. One name kept surfacing in their conversation: Chief Undu. Palm Nut Baron, one of them slurred, the biggest in the region. They say his cart has more gold than the king's treasury. Annette leaned closer, eyes narrowing like a hunter locking in on prey. Undu was no ordinary chief. He was power wrapped in silk and secrecy, and he was coming to Acor. If I win this man, she thought, I don't just get his attention, I get his world. For Annette, this wasn't about seduction, it was about legacy. She had made her way in the village, but now the stage was expanding. This was a new game, and she was ready to play it. The air around her crackled with ambition. This was the beginning of something dangerous and exhilarating. The preparation begins. The very next morning, Annette set her network into motion. She wasn't reckless. Strategy came first. She contacted her most trusted informants, a tailor who dressed half the dignitaries in town, a palm wine vendor who overheard everything from military plans to marital woes, and an old lover who now worked near the palace gates. She needed details. When would Chief Undu arrive? Where would he stay? What kind of women did he entertain? What did he despise? She gathered each thread of intel with precision, and once the picture was clear, she began to build her weapon, herself. By day, she secluded herself. No distractions, only focus. She bathed in floral oils that left her skin glowing like morning dew. She experimented with fabrics until she found the perfect silhouette, one that hinted without revealing, that whispered power without begging for attention. By night, she walked. Long, graceful walks that kept her body strong and her mind sharper. She didn't just want to look stunning, she wanted to feel like a queen in exile waiting to reclaim her throne. And as the date of the chief's arrival drew near, Annette stood on the edge of something vast. This was no longer about proving a point to the village. It wasn't even about survival anymore. This was legacy in motion, the arrival of power, and the game of masks. A storm in silk, Chief Undu's arrival. The sun hung low over Akor as if it too held its breath. On the third morning after the traders' drunken gossip, the earth trembled faintly under the weight of wheels, carriages, hooves like thunder, drums in the distance, and then he appeared, Chief Undu. No one in the village had ever seen a man like him. He did not walk. He arrived, surrounded by guards, draped in fabric that shimmered like obsidian water, his neck heavy with gold charms and silent authority. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark with calculation. Children stared, elders bowed. Even the most prideful men took a step back when he passed. He spoke little, observed much. And when he entered the guest compound at the edge of the village, it felt like the gods themselves had moved into Akor. Annette stood behind the shadows of the trees, her body still, her eyes studying every inch of him. This was not a man to be seduced with honeyed words. This was a man who had seen kingdoms crumble and women rise, and who had learned not to be easily impressed. Annette's first move, the absence strategy. Most women rushed to be seen when men like Undu entered the scene. Perfumes thick as syrup, gowns too bright, voices too loud. They danced around him like moths to flame, desperate to be noticed. But Annette did not show up. Not once. Not even a glance across the courtyard. She made sure of it. Instead, she vanished from the places she was expected to be. The markets, the public baths, the festival where local dancers performed in Undu's honor. Her absence became louder than their presence, and Undu noticed. "There's one woman in this village," he murmured to his steward, "who has no interest in meeting me." The steward nodded. "They call her Annette." Undu smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth twitching with something that could have been interest or caution. The first encounter, testing the waters. It was on the fourth evening that fate, or perhaps strategy, allowed their paths to cross. Annette was walking alone, as she often did. But that evening, she wore simplicity like a weapon. A single white cloth, her skin glowing against the sunset. No jewelry, no companions, just herself and a breeze that seemed to follow her curves. Undu's caravan passed. He turned his head once, their eyes met. She did not smile, she did not bow. She simply looked, calm, open, unbothered. That moment lasted only a few seconds, but something shifted. A new variable entered the game. That night, Undu asked no questions. He sent no gifts, but he remembered. Bolded key section, 2 predators circling, approximately some 200 words. It was a meeting between predators, not lovers. When Annette and Chief Undu finally sat together, it was not in the way the village had imagined. No dramatic seduction, no giggles or wine. It was on the edge of a courtyard garden, under a canopy of stars. Both dressed plainly, both aware. "Why have you not come to greet me like the others?" he asked. Annette's voice was cool. "I don't greet men I haven't decided are worth knowing." Undu did not blink. "And how do you make that decision?" She tilted her head. "By how they react to that answer." They stared at one another, a silence full of sparks. This was not flirtation. It was a duel of minds. No flattery, no praise. Only the bluntness of equals who recognized something dangerous in the other. Both had conquered lesser opponents. Both had turned charm into currency. But here was someone who couldn't be bought or swayed with the usual weapons. For the first time in years, Undu felt curious, and Annette felt seen. Undu's world, power beneath the calm. In the days that followed, Annette was invited, casually at first, to Undu's private circle. It wasn't a date, it was a conversation over tea, then a walk through the grove, then a debate about politics, lineage, and the price of silence. Annette played her cards slowly. She never appeared eager, never asked about his wealth, and never flirted overtly. Instead, she let the mystery breathe. She asked about his values, not his assets. She challenged his views, politely but firmly. Undu, for the first time, stopped testing and started revealing. He told her of his rise, the betrayals, the friends buried, the power struggles between chiefs, the unspoken burden of being rich, admired, and utterly alone. Annette listened, but not like a woman hoping to be chosen. She listened like a mirror, reflecting his strengths and making him question his weaknesses. Village tensions rise. But the village was watching. The women who once laughed at Annette now whispered with envy. The men who once chased her now turned bitter. Rumors spread like wildfire that she was casting spells, using charms, plotting to become a queen. But Annette paid no mind. She knew the greatest threat to small minds was a woman who needed no approval. Still, the tension thickened. Someone sent a warning note to Chief Undu. Another tried to frame Annette, claiming she had stolen something from the local priestess. A desperate move, an obvious lie. Undu confronted her with it. She didn't defend herself. She simply looked at him and said, "If I were afraid of gossip, I would have been married years ago." He laughed and chose her again. The turning point, power shared or power taken. Everything came to a head when Undu invited her to his estate beyond Akor to see the life behind the legend. It was a test. If she said yes, she entered a world of wealth, but also surveillance, expectation, and games more dangerous than flirtation. If she said no, she kept her autonomy, but closed a door that might never open again. Annette stood at the threshold and chose to go, not as a lover, not as a conquest, but as a strategist entering a new arena. She packed lightly, left no notes, gave no farewell, but in her mind, the war drums had begun. Thrones made of mirrors, seduction, strategy, and the price of ascension, the estate, beauty with teeth. The first time Annette saw Undu's estate, she did not gasp. Most did. It was designed for awe, marble halls, onyx staircases, and a reflecting pool. So still, it seemed enchanted. Every tile, every sculpture, every fragrance in the air whispered, "This is what power looks like." But Annette understood something most people didn't. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply watches. She moved through the space with the grace of someone raised around danger. She didn't flinch at the silence of servants' eyes. She didn't fawn over the silk cushions or the golden fruit bowls. She observed. Undu noticed. In private, he asked, "You don't seem impressed." Annette replied, "Everything here is beautiful, but some things feel too perfect." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze. "A home is supposed to breathe. This one holds its breath." And with that, Undu exhaled, for the first time in years. A breath of relief, and perhaps alarm. He knew then, she wasn't here for the gold. She was here for the throne beneath it. The inner court, women with knives in their smiles. Powerful men are rarely alone. Undu's estate was full of people, counselors, stewards, poets, spies. But most dangerous were the women, not lovers, not wives, rivals in silk. They had once captured his interest, earned his trust, or at least his attention. Now, they lived within his orbit like planets circling a sun that might explode at any time. And now, Annette had entered their gravity. At first, they greeted her with charm. Compliments, invitations to tea. But beneath the smiles were questions. Where did she come from? Why does she sit beside him when others stand? Why does he listen when she speaks? Annette did not compete. She did not outshine. She simply stayed rooted, unshakable, present. And that was more threatening than any crown. One woman, Yali, known for her strategic mind, asked Annette directly, "What are you here for?" Annette smiled gently. "To see what doesn't want to be seen." That answer changed the game. Now they watched her not as a visitor, but as a contender. Undu's proposal, not of marriage, but of power. One evening, after a private council meeting, Undu invited Annette to his rooftop, a rare space above the palace where only decisions, not decor, lived. He poured 2 cups of palm wine. No servants, no guards, just stars. He spoke first, slowly, carefully. "Annette, I have no queen. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't know how to trust one." She listened. "I've built this world to protect what I've conquered. But walls that keep out enemies also keep out everything else." She waited. Then, "Are you offering me a place inside the wall, or the chance to tear it down?" He smiled. "Both, maybe." There it was, not a romantic proposal, but a strategic one. A seat at the table, a dangerous, tempting offer. Annette didn't answer that night, but the question burned behind her eyes. Bolded key section, a throne built on fragile beliefs. 200 words. Power, as it turns out, is not held by the strongest. It's held by those whose illusions go unquestioned. And Annette began to ask questions. She asked why the Eastern Village hadn't received clean water in 3 months, why the scholars who criticized Undu was suddenly missing, why his inner circle feared honesty more than failure. Each time she asked, Undu paused, not because he didn't have answers, but because she was the first person who dared to want the real ones. One night, she stood before a mirror in Undu's chambers and whispered, "This kingdom is beautiful, but it's cracking beneath the weight of the unspoken." Undu stood behind her, silent. She turned. "Do you want a partner who mirrors your greatness, or one who reflects your blind spots?" It was the question that undid kings, and maybe began to make one. The mirror strategy, becoming what the court fears most. Annette began to move differently. She did not try to be liked. She simply made herself known for her clarity, her calm, her unwillingness to flatter. And slowly, Undu's advisors came to her, not to impress her, but to confess. She learned what Undu didn't. She heard whispers of rebellion. She read the fear in every delayed report, every silenced village elder. The kingdom wasn't broken yet, but it was brittle, and no one told Undu, except Annette. "You've built a palace of obedience," she said, "but obedience is quiet when it starts to rot." He stared at her. No rage, just a silence that felt ancient. Then he asked, "What would you do if it were your throne?" And for the first time, she answered. The warning change does not come without warning, and Annette's presence was now a threat to those whose safety depended on secrecy. One night, a servant she had befriended whispered, "You are being watched, and not by him." Poison in the kitchen, sabotage in her quarters, a note left on her pillow that simply read, "Leave." She showed it to Undu. He looked at it, folded it, then said, "Now you truly belong here." It wasn't comfort, it was confirmation. She wasn't a guest anymore, she was in the game. The decision, love or legacy. The final moment of part 3 came not with an explosion, but a question. Undu sat with her one morning as birds scattered under the rising sun. He looked tired, mortal. "I built this place so no one could take it from me," he said. "But now I wonder, should it be taken apart?" Annette took his hand. "Not taken apart, rebuilt." He nodded, but then he asked, "Will you rebuild it with me, even if the old world turns against us?" She said nothing. Because the answer wasn't a yes or no. It was a choice between being the jewel on a crown or the architect of a new kingdom. And architects don't always get applause. The price of power, the weight of choice. The moonlight bathed Acor village in a cool bluish haze. A stillness lingered in the air, the kind that often comes before a storm. Annette sat by the window of her private chamber, dressed in silk, her eyes unfocused as they stared past the distant hills. Something had shifted, something within her, and something beyond her. She could feel it in the silence that pressed against the glass. For days, the village had been alive with whispers. Chief Undu had left Acor earlier than expected, and his departure was sudden, too sudden to be natural. Some claimed he had fallen ill. Others said he'd been cursed. A few servants hinted that Annette had gotten what she wanted from him: riches, influence, even political sway. But none dared to say what they truly believed, that something had gone wrong. The truth was more complex. Annette had won. On the surface, her mansion was now the largest in the region. Caravans from the east brought her rare fabrics and spices. Her name was now spoken with either reverence or fear. But in all that victory, there was a hollowness that gnawed at the edges of her certainty. Because somewhere along the way, Annette had lost sight of something deeper than power. Something gentler, yet more dangerous. That night, she received a message. Not from a noble or a chief, but from her younger sister, Ada, who had long lived in the next province, far from Annette's world of strategy and seduction. The letter was brief. "You've built a palace of mirrors, but where are you in them?" Annette read the words again and again, long after the candle had burned down. It was Ada's way. Poetic, piercing, and painfully accurate. The question wasn't about guilt. It was about identity. Had Annette become the very thing she had once mocked, dependent on admiration, addicted to control? She folded the letter carefully, then stood. It was time to confront the cost of her conquest. That evening, she walked through the village, not as a temptress, not as a queen, but simply as a woman. Eyes followed her, but fewer dared to approach. She passed the bakery where she used to steal bread as a child. She paused outside the school where Ada once learned to read under the shade of mango trees. Every path held a memory. Every corner whispered of a self she had left behind. At the well, she met a woman named Ijeoma, once a rival, now a stranger. They stood in silence before Ijeoma spoke. "You have everything now. Why do you look like you've lost?" Annette smiled, not bitterly, but with a softness unfamiliar even to herself. "Because I finally understand what I traded for it." Bolded key passage, approximates 200 words. The hunger that had once fueled her rise, the fire that had driven her to conquer men, manipulate kings, and mold the village in her image, was now a flickering ember. Power, she realized, was only intoxicating when it was unattainable. Once grasped, it dissolved like mist in sunlight. Annette had always believed she was free because she made her own rules, but now she saw the bars she had built around herself. Not made of iron, but of expectation, of persona, of performance. She had become a character in a story she no longer recognized. For so long she had feared being ordinary, feared blending in, being forgotten. But in truth, it was connection, not control, that she longed for. A touch without transaction, a gaze without motive, a life not built on conquest, but on communion. Days turned into weeks. Annette began to dismantle the empire she had built, not with fire, but with intention. She sold half her estate, donating the land to build a library and a new school. She freed the house staff, offering them property and pay to build lives of their own. Rumors spread that she was cursed, that she had lost her mind. But others, those who watched her now walk barefoot through the village, smiling without edge, began to believe something else, that she had found peace. It wasn't easy. The hunger to impress still whispered in moments of doubt. The old habits rose like ghosts, tempting her to reclaim her throne. But each time she chose differently. She chose simplicity. She chose stillness. She chose herself. One morning, as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, Ada arrived in a core. The sisters embraced in silence. There was nothing to prove, nothing to perform. Just two women, one who had escaped the need to shine, and one who had never needed to. They walked together to the riverbank, where the mango trees still stood. Annette sat beneath one, her silk robe traded for simple cotton. Her feet touched the earth. Her voice was calm. "I thought power would free me." Ada smiled. "Real power does, but not the kind you can hold." They stayed there, watching the sun rise, watching the river move. There was no applause, no audience, only presence, only peace.